Snoozecast, the podcast designed to help you fall asleep. Find us on snoozecast.com and follow us on social media and wherever you listen to podcasts. If you enjoy our show, please write a review on the podcast's app. Also, share us with a friend. This episode is brought to you by our Patreon supporters and by Pugs That Tilt Their Heads. Tonight, we'll read a short story by O. Henry titled Snowman, published posthumously in 1917. William Sidney Porter, pen name O. Henry, is known for his stories with surprise twist endings. This particular story had to be left unfinished by the author as he was dying, so he asked a friend and fellow writer to finish it for him. Let's get cozy. Close your eyes. Relax your body into the softness of your bed. Now, take a few deep breaths. The Snowman. Housed and window-paned from it, the greatest wonder to little children is the snow. To men, it is something like a crucible in which the world melts into a white star a million miles away. The man who can stand the test is a snowman, and this is his reading by Moses' carven tablets of stone. Night had fluttered a sable pinion above the canyon of Big Lost River, and I urged my horse toward the Bay Horse Ranch because the snow was deepening. The flakes were as large as an hour's circular tatting by Miss Wilkins' ablest spinster, beckoning a heavy snowfall and less entertainment and more adventure than the completion of the tatting could promise. I knew Ross Curtis of the Bay Horse, and that I would be welcome as a snow-bound pilgrim, both for hospitality's sake and because Ross had few chances to confide in living creatures who did not neigh, bellow, bleat, yelp, or howl during his discourse. The ranch house was just within the jaws of the canyon, where its builder may have fancied that the timbered and rocky walls on both sides would have protected it from the wintry Colorado winds. But I feared the drift. Even now, through the endless, bottomless rift in the hills, the speaking tube of the four winds, came roaring the voice of the proprietor to the little room on the top floor. At my hello, a ranch hand came from an outer building and received my thankful horse. In another minute, Ross and I sat by a stove in the dining room of the four-room ranch house, while the big, simple welcome of the household lay at my disposal. Fanned by the whizzing norther, the fine, dry snow was sifted and bolted through the cracks and knotholes of the logs. The cook room, without a separating door, appended. In there I could see a short, sturdy, leisurely, and weather-beaten man moving with professional sureness about his red-hot stove. His face was stolid and unreadable, something like that of a great thinker, or of one who had no thoughts to conceal. I thought his eyes seemed unwarrantably superior to the elements and to the man, but quickly attributed that to the characteristic self-importance of a petty chef. Camp cook was the niche that I gave him in the Hall of Types, and he fitted it as an apple fits a dumpling. Cold it was, in spite of the glowing stove, and Ross and I sat and talked, shuddering frequently, half from nerves and half from the freezing draughts. So he brought the bottle, and the cook brought boiling water, and we made hot toddies against the attacks of Boreas. We clinked glasses, often. They sounded like icicles dropping from the eaves, or like 1,000 prisms on a chandelier that I once heard at a boarder's dance in the parlor of a 10-a-week boarding house in Gramercy Square. Silence in the terrible beauty of the snow and of the Sphinx and of the stars. But they who believe that all things, from a without wine table to the crucifixion, may be interpreted through music, might have found a nocturne or a symphony to express the isolation of that blotted-out world. The clink of glass and bottle, the chorus of the wind in the house crannies, its deeper trombone through the canyon below, and the crash of the cook's pots and pans, united in a fit melody, I thought. No less welcome was the sizzling of broiling ham and venison cutlet, endorsed by the solvent fumes of true Java, bringing rich promises of comfort to our yearning souls. The cook brought the smoking supper to the table. He nodded to me democratically as he cast the heavy plates around as though he were pitching or hurling the discus. I looked at him with some appraisement and curiosity and much conciliation. There was no prophet to tell us when the drifting evil outside might cease to fall, and it is well, when snowbound, to stand somewhere within the radius of the cook's favorable consideration. But I could read neither favor nor disapproval in the face and manner of our pot wrestler. He was about 5 feet 9 inches, and 200 pounds of commonplace, bull-necked, pink-faced, callous calm. He wore brown duck trousers, too tight and too short, and a blue flannel shirt with sleeves rolled above his elbows. There was a sort of grim, steady scowl on his features that looked to me as though he had fixed it there purposely, as a protection against the weakness of an inherent amiability that, he fancied, were better concealed. And then I let supper usurp his brief occupancy of my thoughts. "Draw up, George," said Ross. "Let's all eat while the grub's hot." "You fellows go on and chew," answered the cook. "I ate mine in the kitchen before sundown." "Think it'll be a big snow, George?" asked the ranchman. George had turned to re-enter the cookroom. He moved slowly around and, looking at his face, it seemed to me that he was turning over the wisdom and knowledge of centuries in his head. "It might," was his delayed reply. At the door of the kitchen he stopped and looked back at us. Both Ross and I held our knives and forks poised and gave him our regard. Some men have the power of drawing the attention of others without speaking a word. Their attitude is more effective than a shout. "And again it mightn't," said George, and went back to his stove. After we had eaten, he came in and gathered the emptied dishes. He stood for a moment, while his spurious frown deepened. "It might stop any minute," he said, "or it might keep up for days. At the farther end of the cook room, I saw George pour hot water into his dishpan, light his pipe, and put the tableware through its required lavation. He then carefully unwrapped from a piece of old saddle blanket a paperback book and settled himself to read by his dim oil lamp. And then the ranchman threw tobacco on the cleared table and set forth again the bottles and glasses, and I saw that I stood in a deep channel through the long flood of his discourse which would soon be booming. But I was half content, comparing my fate with that of the late Thomas Tucker, who had to sing for his supper, thus doubling the burdens of both himself and his host. "Snow is a hell of a thing," said Ross, by way of a foreword. "It ain't, somehow, it seems to me, so laborious. I can stand water and mud and 2 inches below zero and 110 in the shade and medium-sized cyclones, but this here fuzzy white stuff naturally gets me all loco. I reckon the reason it rattles you is because it changes the look of things so much. It's like you had a wife and left her in the morning with the same old blue cotton wrapper on, and rides in on a night and runs across her all outfitted in a white silk evening frock, waving an ostrich feather fan and monkeying with a posse of lily flowers. Wouldn't it make you look for your pocket compass? You'd be liable to kiss her before you collected your presence of mind." By and by, the flood of Ross's talk was drawn up into the clouds, so it pleased me to fancy, and there condensed into the finer snowflakes of thought, and we sat silent about the stove, as good friends and bitter enemies will do. I thought of Ross's preamble about the mysterious influence upon man exerted by that ermine-lined monster that now covered our little world, and knew he was right. Of all the curious knickknacks, mysteries, puzzles, rat traps, and well-disguised blessings that the gods chuck down to us from the Olympian peaks, the most disquiet and evil-bringing is the snow. By scientific analysis, it is absolute beauty and purity. So, at the beginning, we look doubtfully at chemistry. It falls upon the world, and lo, we live in another. It hides in a night the old scars and familiar places with which we have grown heartsick or enamored. As quietly as we can, we hustle on our robes and hie us up on Prince Camaralzaman's horse, or in the reindeer sleigh into the white country where the 7 colors converge. This is when our fancy can overcome the bane of it. But in certain spots of the earth comes the snow madness, made known by people turned wild and distracted by the bewildering veil that has obscured the only world they knew. In the cities, the white fairy who sets the brains of her dupes whirling by a wave of her hand is cast for the comedy role. Her diamond shoe buckles glitter like frost. With a pirouette, she invites the spotless carnival. But in the waste places, the snow is sardonic. Sponging out the world of the outliers, it gives no foothold on another sphere in return. It makes of the earth a firmament underfoot. It leaves us clawing and stumbling in place, in a fifth element whose evil outdoes its strangeness and beauty. There nature, low comedienne, plays her tricks on man. Though she has put him forth as her highest product, it appears that she has fashioned him with what seems almost incredible carelessness and indexterity. one-sided and without balance, with his two halves unequally fashioned and joined. Must he ever jog his eccentric way? The snow falls, the darkness caps it, and the ridiculous man biped strays in accurate circles until he succumbs in the ruins of his defective architecture. In the throat of the thirsty snow is vitriol, in appearance as plausible as the breakfast food of the angels. It is as hot in the mouth as ginger, increasing the pangs of the water-famished. It is a derivative from water, air, and some cold, uncanny fire from which the caloric has been extracted. Good has been said of it. Even the poets, crazed by its spell and shivering in their antics under its touch, have indited permanent melodies commemorative of its beauty. Still, to the saddest, overcoated optimist, it is a plague. A corroding plague that Pharaoh successfully sidestepped. It beneficently covers the wheat fields, swelling the crop, and the flower trust gets us by the throat like a sudden quinsy. It spreads the tail of its white kirtle over the red seams of the rugged north, and the Alaskan short story is born. It shelters the mountain traveler burrowing from the icy air, and, melting tomorrow, drowns his brother in the valley below. At its worst, it is lock and key and crucible and the wand of Circe. When it corrals man in lonely ranches, mountain cabins, and forest huts, the snow makes apes and tigers of the hardiest. It turns the bosom of weaker ones to glass, their tongues to infants' rattles, their hearts to lawlessness and spleen. It is not all from the isolation. The snow is not merely a blockader. It is a chemical test. It is a good man who can show a reaction that is not chiefly composed of potash and magnesia, with traces of Adam, Nebuchadnezzar, and the fretful porcupine. This is no story, you say. Well, let it begin. There was a knock at the door. Is the opening not full of context and reminiscent, best buyers of bestsellers? We drew the latch, and in stumbled Gerard, as he afterward named himself. But just then he was no more than a worm struggling for life, enveloped in a killing white chrysalis. We dug down through the snow, overcoats, mufflers, and waterproofs, and dragged forth a living thing with a Van Dyke beard and marvelous diamond rings. We put it through the approved curriculum of snow rubbing, hot milk, and teaspoonful doses of whiskey, working him up to a graduating class entitled to a diploma of 3 fingers of rye and half a glassful of hot water. One of the ranch boys had already come from the quarters at Ross's bugle-like yell and kicked the stranger's staggering pony to some sheltered corral where beasts were entertained. Let a paragraphic biography of Gerard intervene. He was an opera singer originally, we gathered, but adversity and the snow had made him non-compos vocus. The adversity consisted of the stranded San Salvador Opera Company, a period of hotel second-story work, and then a career as a professional palmist, jumping from town to town. For, like other professional palmists, every time he worked the heart line too strongly, he immediately moved along the line of least resistance. Though Gerard did not confide this to us, we surmised that he had moved out into the dusk about 20 minutes ahead of a constable, and had thus encountered the snow. In his most sacred blue language, he dilated upon the subject of snow. For Gerard was Paris born, and loved the snow with the same passion that an orchid does. "Miserable," commented Gerard, and took another 3 fingers. "Complete cast iron blank blank," said Ross, and followed suit. "Rotten," said I. The cook said nothing. He stood in the door, weighing our outburst, and insistently from behind that frozen visage I got 2 messages via the MAM wireless. One was that George considered our outburst against the snow childish. The other was that George did not love strangers. Inasmuch as Gerard was a Frenchman, I concluded I had the message wrong, so I queried the other. "Bright Eyes, you don't really mean strangers, do you?" And over the wireless came 3 deathly psychic taps. Yes. Then I reflected that to George, all foreigners were probably strangers. I had once known another camp cook who had thought Messieurs Milly were Italian given names. This cook used to marvel, therefore, at the paucity of the names. I have said that snow is a test of men. For 1 day, 2 days, Gerard stood at the window, Fletcherizing his fingernails and shrieking and moaning at the monotony. To me, Gerard was just about as unbearable as the snow. And so, seeking relief, I went out on the 2nd day to look at my horse, slipped on a stone, broke my collarbone, and thereafter underwent not the snow test, but the test of flat on the back. A test that comes once too often for any man to stand. However, I bore up cheerfully. I was now merely a spectator, and from my couch in the big room I could lie and watch the human interplay with that detached, impassive, impersonal feeling which French writers tell us is so valuable, and American writers to the faro dealer. "I shall go crazy in this abominable, miserable place," was Gerard's constant prediction. "Never knew Mark Twain to bore me before," said Ross, over and over. He sat by the other window, hour after hour, a box of Pittsburgh stogies of the length, strength, and odor of a Pittsburgh graft scandal deposited on one side of him, and Roughing It, The Jumping Frog, and Life on the Mississippi on the other. For every chapter, he lit a new stogie, puffing furiously. This in time gave him a recurrent premonition of cramps, gastritis, smoker's colic, or whatever it is they have in Pittsburgh after a too deep indulgence in graft scandals. To fend off the colic, Ross resorted time and again to old Dr. Still's amber colored USA colic cure. Result? After 48 hours, nerves. Positive fact I never knew Mark Twain to make me tired before. Positive fact, Ross slammed. When you're snowbound this way, you want tragedy. I guess humor just seems to bring out all your cussedness. You read a man's poor, pitiful attempts to be funny, and it makes you so nervous. You want to tear the book up, get out your bandana, and have a good, long cry. At the other end of the room, The Frenchman took his fingernails out of his mouth long enough to exclaim, "Humor? Humor at such a time as these? My God, I shall go crazy in this abominable supper," announced George. These meals were not the meals of Rabelais, who said, "The great God makes the planets, and we make the platters neat." By that time, the ranch house meals were not affairs of gusto. They were mental distraction, not bodily provender. What they were to be later shall never be forgotten by Ross or me.